You're coming with us. We need a daddy like you. That's what two little voices said out on a frozen trail in the high Colorado Pass. A lonely mountain man stopped his mule, snow in his beard, and saw them. Two small girls, thin coats, eyes bright with stubborn hope. He thought he'd walk on. He thought wrong. What waited in their cabin was worse than the storm. A mother fading fast, a fire dying low, and no one else coming. But when the law came, it wasn't to help. It was to take the girls east, far from the only family they had left. Now, with the railroad sniffing at their land and the town whispering about their blood, one quiet man must decide, turn away again, or stand like a father when the wolves circle. Because sometimes the fight isn't with guns, it's with your own fear of loving and losing all over again. Every story brings us a little closer together. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. It's a joy to see how far this family of listeners reaches. The winter wind whistled through the Colorado highlands, carrying snow flurries that dusted the trail like powdered sugar. Ezekiel Boone hunched deeper into his wool coat, urging his mule forward with a gentle click of his tongue. The leather bags slung across the animal's back were heavy with supplies from the settlement, flour, beans, and lamp oil that would see him through another month of solitude in his mountain cabin. Zeke's weathered face, lined from years in the wilderness, showed little expression as he navigated the familiar path. At 45, his dark hair had started graying at the temples, matching the overcast sky above. The creak of leather and the mule's steady breathing had been his only companions for so long, he'd almost forgotten what conversation felt like. Near a bend in the creek where ice crackled against bare branches, two small figures appeared on the trail ahead. Zeke blinked, wondering if the cold was playing tricks on his eyes. But no, there stood two identical girls, about 8 years old, their matching faces peering out from mismatched coats that had seen better days. The mule stopped, sensing its rider's surprise. The girls planted themselves firmly in the middle of the path, their worn boots leaving small prints in the fresh snow. Their china blue eyes held a determination that made Zeke shift uncomfortably in his saddle. "You're coming with us," one of them announced, her chin lifted with the kind of authority only a child could muster. "We need a daddy like you." Zeke's throat tightened. The word daddy struck him like a physical blow, stirring memories he'd worked hard to bury. "Now listen here," he started, his voice rough from disuse. "Our mama's sick," the other twin cut in. "Real sick, and we ain't got nobody else." Zeke's fingers tightened on the reins. "Where's your pa?" "In heaven," they answered in unison, the word hanging in the frosty air between them. He tried to guide his mule around them, but they moved to block his path again. The determination in their eyes reminded him of mountain streams. There was no stopping them once they'd chosen their course. "Please," the first twin said, reaching up to touch his boot. Her mitten was darned in 3 different colors of yarn. "Mama's coughing something awful." Zeke looked down the trail toward his cabin, then back at the girls. Their faces were pinched with worry, cheeks reddened by the cold. Something in him shifted, like ice breaking up in spring. "Show me," he said finally, dismounting with a grunt. They led him off the main trail to a cabin that leaned slightly to one side, as if tired of standing straight. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney. Inside, the air was thick with the sweet, sharp smell of illness and wood smoke. A woman lay on a narrow bed covered in a patchwork of quilts. Her face was pale as new milk, except for 2 spots of color high on her cheeks. Dark hair spilled across the pillow, and her breathing came in ragged pulls that made Zeke's chest hurt just listening. "I'm Clara Dawes," she managed between coughs, trying to sit up. "I'm sorry if my girls bothered you, mister." "Boone," he supplied. "Ezekiel Boone. But folks call me Zeke." He set his supplies down on the rough wooden table, noting how bare the shelves looked. "Your girls are persistent." A ghost of a smile touched Clara's lips. "That they are. Lydia and Lottie have their own minds about things." The twins had already started unpacking his supplies, setting them out like treasures. Zeke watched them for a moment, then stepped back outside. The sound of his axe soon rang through the clearing as he split the pile of wood he'd found behind the cabin. The girls appeared with a pot, and he filled it with creek water, breaking through a thin crust of ice to reach the flowing water beneath. Inside, he built up the fire until warmth began to seep back into the cabin's corners. Clara's cough seemed to ease a little as the air warmed. The twins moved around the small space like they'd been born knowing how to care for a sick parent, which made something twist in Zeke's chest. The short winter day was already fading when he finally stepped toward the door. "That ought to hold you for now," he said, reaching for his coat. "Thank you kindly," Clara whispered from her bed. Her eyes were clearer now, watching him with a mixture of gratitude and something else he couldn't name. The twins followed him outside. "You'll come back," one of them said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. Zeke mounted his mule, looking down at their upturned faces. They stood shoulder to shoulder, two parts of the same determination. He touched the brim of his hat, then turned his mule toward home. Behind him, he could feel their eyes boring into his back, sure as sunshine that this wasn't the last they'd see of him. As the trail curved around the bend, he heard one of them say, "Told you he was the right one." The words followed him all the way home to his empty cabin, where the silence seemed heavier than before. He went about his evening chores, banking the fire, feeding his mule, setting water to boil for coffee, but his thoughts kept drifting back to that leaning cabin and its inhabitants. The twins' words echoed in his mind. "We need a daddy like you." For the first time in years, his solitary routine felt less like peace and more like hiding. He stood in his doorway, watching darkness settle over the mountains, knowing somehow that those two determined little girls had just changed the course of his carefully ordered life, like a creek changing its path after a spring flood. Morning sunlight filtered through the frost-edged windows of Zeke's cabin as he worked at his rough-hewn table. His calloused fingers moved with practiced care over the broken bridle strap. Years of solitude had taught him to mend his own gear, and the familiar task usually brought him peace. But today, his thoughts kept drifting to the twin girls and their ailing mother. The leather was nearly repaired when the sound of approaching hoofbeats crunched through the snow outside. Zeke's head snapped up, unused to visitors. He set aside his work and moved to the door, opening it just as Constable Morris dismounted his bay horse. "Boone," the lawman nodded, stamping snow from his boots. His badge caught the morning light. "Heard you met the Dawes girls yesterday." "News travels fast," Zeke said, stepping back to let the constable inside. The smaller man's presence filled the cabin's usual silence. "Had to bring you word." Morris warmed his hands by the potbelly stove. "Clara Dawes took a turn for the worse before dawn. Reverend Kane and his wife moved her to the church infirmary in town." He paused, watching Zeke's reaction. "Doctor's with her now." Zeke's fingers tightened on the back of a chair. "The girls? That's the other thing." Morris sighed, removing his hat. "With no kin to speak of, they're wards of the county now. There's an orphan train heading east in a month's time. Chances are good they'll find proper homes in Pennsylvania or Ohio." The word homes echoed strangely in Zeke's ears. He remembered the fierce determination in those matching faces. "They got a home," he said gruffly. "Funny you should mention that." Morris's expression grew serious. "Those little spitfires are telling everyone who'll listen that you're their chosen father. Say it like it's already settled." Zeke turned away, pretending to adjust the stove damper. "They don't know what they're saying." "Maybe not. But if you're of a mind to do something about it, you'd need to file a petition with Judge Halbrook." Morris cleared his throat. "He'd want proof of a respectable household, mind you. Proper arrangements for their schooling and such." "I ain't fit for family," Zeke said sharply. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "Living alone suits me fine." Morris replaced his hat, moving toward the door. "Maybe so, but those girls seem mighty sure about you, Boone. And spring ain't the best time for little ones to be traveling east with strangers." He mounted his horse, gathering the reins. "Judge holds court Tuesdays and Thursdays if you change your mind." Zeke watched until the constable disappeared around the bend, then went back to his leather work, but his hands wouldn't steady. The cabin's familiar silence pressed in around him like a weight. As evening approached, he built up the fire and settled into his chair, trying to lose himself in the dancing flames. Instead, unwanted memories crept in like shadows. His wife Sarah's laugh, bright as summer sunshine. Their infant son Daniel's tiny fingers curled around his thumb. The fever that took them both in one cruel week, leaving him alone with a cabin full of ghosts. He'd fled to the mountains then, building this new place far from anything that reminded him of his loss. For 15 years he'd kept the world at arm's length, wearing his solitude like armor. Now, 2 determined little girls had found a crack in that armor, and he couldn't seem to patch it. Sleep eluded him. He tossed in his narrow bed, haunted by the twins' voices. "We need a daddy like you." By first light, he gave up trying to rest. The familiar routine of feeding his mule brought no comfort. Each fork of hay he tossed reminded him of the lean-to shelter behind the Dawes cabin, where a tired old horse needed feeding. His movements grew more agitated as he saddled his mount, checking the cinch with unnecessary force. The early morning air bit at his face as he rode toward town. Fresh snow had fallen in the night, and his mule's hooves broke through the crusty surface with each step. The sound of the twins' voices echoed in his head, keeping time with the steady rhythm of his mount's gait. "They don't need me," he muttered into his collar. But the words rang hollow in the crisp mountain air. The sun climbed higher, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold, as Zeke Boone rode toward a future he'd never planned for, driven by the memory of 2 pairs of determined blue eyes and the weight of his own long-buried grief. The town's church spire appeared on the horizon, its white paint bright against the winter sky. Somewhere in its shadow, Clara Dawes fought her fever while her daughters waited, certain as sunrise that the mountain man they'd chosen would come for them. Zeke urged his mule forward, trying not to think about what he'd do when he got there. The town bustled with mid-morning activity as Zeke guided his mule down the snow-packed main street. Shop doors creaked open and shut, letting out puffs of warm air. The telegraph office's dots and dashes clicked steadily, while the smell of fresh bread wafted from the bakery. It all felt foreign to him after so many years of mountain solitude. He tied his mule to the hitching post outside the white-painted church, adjusting his coat before climbing the steps to the attached infirmary wing. The floorboards squeaked beneath his boots as a young nurse pointed him toward the last bed by the window. Clara Dawes lay propped up on pillows, her face pale against the starched white linens. But her eyes were clear and alert as she watched her daughters perched on wooden stools beside her bed. The twins spotted him first. "Daddy came!" Lydia and Lottie chorused, jumping up with matching grins. Their excitement drew the attention of Reverend Kane, who stood writing in a ledger by the door. "Mr. Boone," the pastor said, closing his book, "the girls said you'd come." His tone held a mix of surprise and cautious hope. Zeke removed his hat, uncertain what to say. The small room felt crowded with expectations he wasn't sure he could meet. "The county has specific requirements for guardianship," Reverend Kane continued, moving closer. "Moral character must be demonstrated, a proper home provided. These girls need schooling, guidance." "I never asked this of you," Clara interrupted softly from her bed. Her voice was weak but determined. "The girls, they have their own ideas about things." A cough shook her thin frame. Lydia grabbed Zeke's rough hand in her small one. "We chose him, Mama. He's perfect." "Got wood for us yesterday," Lottie added firmly. "And water, too." Zeke looked down at their hopeful faces, then at their mother's worried one. The weight of their trust pressed against his chest like a physical thing. "Reckon I should talk to the judge," he said gruffly. "See what's what." Relief flickered across Clara's features. "They're good girls, Mr. Boone, but they need more than I can give right now." The twins beamed as if the matter was settled. Perhaps it had been since that moment on the snowy trail when they'd first blocked his path. Judge Halbrook's office occupied a modest room above the general store. The afternoon sun slanted through dusty windows as Zeke explained his situation. The judge listened carefully, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Temporary guardianship is possible," Halbrook said finally. 60 days to prove you can provide proper care and raising." He pulled out several official papers. "You'll need references, proof of income, evidence the girls are receiving education and moral instruction. Zeke's hands felt clumsy as he signed where indicated. The judge's pen scratched across the documents, making everything official. Mind you, Halbrook added, this arrangement can be revoked if requirements aren't met. He handed Zeke the folded papers. Those girls deserve stability, Mr. Boone. Can you provide that? The question followed Zeke back to the infirmary, where the twins waited with their small carpet bags packed. Clara reached for his hand as he approached her bed. Thank you, she whispered, for giving them a chance. We'll come see you soon as you're stronger, he promised. Her fingers felt fragile as bird bones against his calloused palm. The journey home took longer than usual. Snow began falling in lazy spirals as they rode, Lydia sharing Zeke's saddle, while Lottie perched on the mule's broad back. Their chatter filled the forest with questions and observations. Do you have chickens? Lottie wanted to know. Can we plant a garden come spring? Lydia asked. Are there bears near your cabin? Will we learn to fish? Zeke answered what he could, increasingly aware of how ill-prepared his solitary life had left him for children. The cabin that had always felt sufficient now seemed shabby through new eyes. Dusk was settling as they finally reached home. The twins fell silent at the sight of the dark building, its windows blank and uninviting. Inside, the fire had died to cold ashes. While Zeke lit the lamps and stoked new flames in the stove, the girls explored their surroundings. Where will we sleep? Lydia asked, eyeing the single narrow bed in the corner. Zeke surveyed his sparse furnishings with fresh concern. I'll make up pallets by the fire tonight. Tomorrow we'll sort proper arrangements. The reality of his decision was settling in like the snow outside, soft but inexorable, changing everything it touched. As he watched the twins unpack their meager belongings, Zeke felt the walls of his carefully constructed solitude beginning to crumble. But when Lottie looked up at him with complete trust and asked, "What's for supper, Daddy?" he knew there was no going back. The next 60 days would reshape his world entirely. He could only hope he was equal to the task. Zeke stirred the pot of beans simmering on the iron stove, adding a pinch of salt. The familiar motions felt different with 2 pairs of eager eyes watching his every move. Can we help? Lydia asked, bouncing on her toes. We know how to cook. Mama taught us. Reckon you could mix up the cornbread, Zeke said, measuring flour into his mother's old ceramic bowl. Before he could demonstrate, both girls reached for the container at once. Flour puffed up in a white cloud, dusting their faces and the rough wooden floor. Instead of scolding, they burst into giggles. The sound echoed off the cabin walls, strange and bright in the usually quiet space. Zeke found himself fighting back a smile as he handed them a rag to clean up. Sorry, Lottie said, still grinning. We'll do better next time. Next time. The words settled in his chest like warm coals. The beans and slightly lopsided cornbread turned out well enough. The twins ate heartily, telling stories between bites about their mama's cooking and their old life before she got sick. Their chatter filled the cabin, pushing back the darkness gathering outside. When the dishes were done, Zeke led them up the ladder to the sleeping loft. He'd never used the space himself, but it would serve the girls well enough. He hauled up extra quilts from his storage chest, showing them how to make pallets on the wooden floor. It ain't much, he said gruffly, but it'll keep you warm. It's perfect, Lydia declared, wrapping herself in a faded blue quilt. The winter wind rattled the shutters, making the lamp flame dance. We can see the stars through the roof boards, Lottie whispered, pointing to tiny gaps where light might peek through on clear nights. Zeke climbed down, leaving them to settle in. He banked the fire and stretched out on his narrow bed, listening to their soft whispers fade into steady breathing. The cabin felt different already, less empty, more alive. Dawn brought new surprises. The sharp smell of burning jolted him awake. He found the twins crouched by the hearth, trying to brew coffee in his battered pot. Ground scattered the stones, and smoke curled up from something scorched. We wanted to make breakfast, Lydia explained, her face smudged with ash, like Mama does. Like Mama did, Lottie corrected quietly. Zeke showed them how to properly measure the coffee and control the fire. Soon, the familiar aroma of brewing coffee replaced the burnt smell. He demonstrated how to make a simple breakfast of porridge, noting how intently they watched his every move. The days that followed brought constant motion to his once orderly life. The girls seemed unable to sit still, always finding something new to arrange or clean or question. They swept the cabin with an old broom, though their enthusiasm often stirred up more dust than it cleared. Pine boughs appeared on the windowsills, bringing their fresh scent inside. Their questions never ceased. About his rifle. How far can it shoot? About his traps. Don't the animals get hurt? About the war? Were you scared? Zeke answered what he could, sidestepped what he couldn't, and found himself talking more than he had in years. Most surprising was how often he caught himself smiling, at their determined attempts to fold clothes exactly right, at their excitement over spotting deer tracks in the snow, at the way they finished each other's sentences without seeming to notice. On the 5th day, hoofbeats approached the cabin. Deacon Mills from the church dismounted, his formal black coat stark against the snow. The twins pressed close to Zeke's side as the deacon entered. "Judge Halbrook sent me to inspect the living conditions," Mills announced, his eyes scanning the cabin. He noted the single bed, the sparse furnishings, the rough-hewn walls. His pencil scratched across a notebook as he checked items off a list. "Girls," he addressed the twins directly, "are you being properly cared for?" "Oh yes," Lydia said firmly. "Zeke teaches us things." "He made sure we had enough quilts," Lottie added, "and he never forgets to stoke the fire at night." The deacon's expression softened slightly as he observed their well-fed looks and bright eyes. "They seem content," he admitted, making a final note, "though there's much room for improvement in the accommodations." After Mills departed, Zeke found himself restless. The deacon's judgment weighed on him, making him see his home through outside eyes. The twins sensed his mood, staying quieter than usual as evening approached. "Here," he said finally, pulling out his mending basket. "Time you learned something useful." He showed them how to thread needles and make neat stitches in worn socks. Their first attempts were clumsy, but they persisted. Soon laughter returned to the cabin. Lydia told jokes while she worked, making Lottie giggle so hard she pricked her finger. The fire crackled warmly, and their voices blended with its familiar sound. Zeke watched their bent heads dark and light, so intent on their task. His cabin was changing, transforming from a place of solitude into something else entirely. Each new addition, the pine boughs, the girls' few possessions carefully arranged, their laughter echoing in the rafters, marked the shift. What had been simply shelter was slowly becoming a home. The thought should have frightened him more than it did. Instead, as he helped Lottie untangle her thread and showed Lydia how to make smaller stitches, he felt something long frozen in his chest begin to thaw. Sunlight glinted off fresh snow as Zeke hitched his mule to the wooden sled early Sunday morning. He'd polished his old cavalry boots and put on his one good shirt, faded blue cotton pressed smooth with a heated iron. The twins emerged from the cabin wearing their best dresses, hair neatly braided. "Ready for church?" he asked, adjusting the blankets in the sled. "We haven't been since Mama got sick," Lydia said, climbing in beside her sister. "Will everyone stare at us?" "Let 'em stare," Zeke said gruffly, though his stomach tightened at the thought of facing the whole congregation. Still, the judge would want to see them attending services regular-like. Showing moral character meant more than just keeping the girls fed and warm. The journey into town took longer than usual, the sled runners creaking over packed snow. Breath frosted in the cold air as the girls pointed out rabbit tracks and snow-laden pine boughs. The church bell was already ringing as they pulled up to the hitching post. Inside, warmth from the pot-bellied stove wrapped around them. The wooden pews gleamed with years of polish, and morning light streamed through tall windows. Several people nodded greetings as Zeke led the twins to an empty bench near the back. Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife, hurried over. "How wonderful to see you girls here." She smiled warmly. "And Mr. Boone, we've missed you these past years." The twins beamed, but Zeke just nodded. He hadn't stepped foot in church since burying his wife and son. The familiar hymns and scripture readings stirred memories he usually kept buried deep. As the congregation settled, whispers drifted through the air like falling leaves. At first, they were friendly enough, wondering about Clara's health, commenting on how well the girls looked. Then the tone changed. "Heard tell their pa was half Comanche," someone murmured 2 pews ahead, "running with his people when he died. And now that widow's lost her land claim," another voice added. Zeke's jaw tightened. He glanced at the twins, but they were focused on their hymn books, small fingers tracing the words. If they heard the whispers, they gave no sign. The service seemed endless. When the final amen sounded, Zeke ushered the girls outside into the crisp air. They needed supplies from the general store before visiting Clara at the infirmary. As they crossed the street, a man spat into the snow near their feet. "Ain't right," he muttered, just loud enough to hear. "Mixing blood like that. Those girls ought to be with their own kind." Before the twins could process the words, Zeke spun around. His voice came out low and dangerous, like distant thunder. "Those girls are exactly where they belong. Their mama's a fine woman who loves them proper, and their pa was a good man who died protecting his family." He stepped closer. "I won't hear another word against them. Clear?" The man's face reddened, but he dropped his eyes and shuffled away. Several townspeople had stopped to watch. Zeke kept his hand on Lottie's shoulder as they entered the store. Inside, the shopkeeper treated them with careful politeness while Zeke bought sugar, coffee, and a small bag of dried apples for Clara. The twins stayed close to his side, quieter than usual. At the infirmary, they found Clara sitting up in bed. Some color returned to her cheeks. Her face lit up when the girls rushed to hug her. "Mama, we went to church," Lydia announced, "and Zeke wore his good shirt." "Did he now?" Clara's eyes met Zeke's, warm with understanding. That was mighty thoughtful. While the twins told their mother about the service and showed her the dried apples, Zeke stood by the window, watching snow begin to fall. The flakes came down thick and fast, already coating the ground. "We'd best head home before the weather worsens," he said finally. Clara caught his sleeve as he turned to go. "Thank you," she said softly, "for taking them to church. And—" She hesitated. "Mrs. Peterson told me what happened outside the store. Thank you for standing up for us." Zeke nodded, something in his chest loosening at her words. Weren't nothing but the truth. The journey home was slow, the fresh snow making the sled runners drag. The twins huddled under blankets in the back, their voices rising sweet and clear in a hymn their mother had taught them. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." The familiar words floated out across the white landscape. Zeke felt warmth spread through him despite the cold, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Not happiness exactly, but something close. Something like peace. As the girls' singing mixed with the gentle crunch of snow under the mule's hooves, Zeke realized his grip on the reins had relaxed. The burden of grief he'd carried so long felt lighter somehow, softened by the simple sound of children's voices and the trust in Clara's eyes when she'd thanked him. Early December brought shorter days and deeper snow to the Colorado Highlands. Frost etched delicate patterns on the cabin windows each morning, and wood smoke curled steadily from the stone chimney. Inside, warmth and new routines filled the once lonely space. "Mind your fingers now," Zeke instructed, showing Lydia how to hold the kindling axe. "Let the weight do the work." He guided her small hands through the motion, and the piece of pine split cleanly. "My turn!" Lottie bounced on her toes, already reaching for the tool. "Steady there," Zeke cautioned. "Ain't no rush when you're working with sharp things." The girls took turns practicing, their faces screwed up in concentration. By mid-morning, they had a neat pile of kindling stacked against the cabin wall. Their cheeks were pink with effort and pride. "Mama always said we need to learn everything," Lydia explained, brushing wood chips from her apron, "so we can take care of ourselves proper." Something about her serious tone made Zeke's chest tighten. "Your mama's right about that," he said. "Speaking of learning, time to check them rabbit snares I showed you yesterday." They trudged through knee-deep snow to the line of traps he'd set with them, the girls pointing out different animal tracks along the way. 2 snares had sprung empty, but the third held a plump jackrabbit. "Remember how I showed you?" Zeke asked. Lottie nodded solemnly. "Check if it's still warm first. If it is, reset the snare quick so nothing goes to waste." "That's right." Zeke demonstrated how to reset the trap, then let them practice with the empty ones. Their small fingers worked carefully with the wire, just as he'd taught them. Back at the cabin, they discovered a leak in the roof over the storage corner. Water dripped steadily onto the flour sack below. "Up we go," Zeke said, fetching his toolbox. He helped the twins climb the ladder to the roof, showing them how to spot loose shingles and apply patches of pine tar. They worked together, passing tools and holding boards steady. "We're real builders now," Lydia declared, examining her tar-stained hands. Later that afternoon, the girls insisted on teaching Zeke their mother's biscuit recipe. They giggled as he fumbled with measuring cups and spilled flour down his shirt front. No, Lottie corrected, taking his hands in hers. "You got to work the butter and gentle-like, or they'll come out tough as leather." "Your mama teach you all this?" Zeke asked, trying to copy their delicate motions. "Every Sunday after church," Lydia said. "She says cooking's like prayer. You got to put your whole heart in it." The biscuits came out lopsided but edible, and the proud looks on the girls' faces made up for his clumsy attempts. When market day arrived, they loaded Zeke's winter pelts into the sled. The twins helped sort and roll the furs, chattering about what they hoped to buy in town. The morning air was crisp and clear as they set out, bells jingling on the mule's harness. At the general store, Zeke's pelts fetched a fair price. The girls watched wide-eyed as he counted out coins for sturdy new boots to replace their worn ones. There was enough left over for thick wool cloth in deep blue. "Just like Mama's eyes," Lottie declared. Mr. Peterson, the store owner, called Zeke aside while the girls examined fabric. "Telegram came from Mrs. Dawes," he said quietly, holding out a yellow envelope. "Church is keeping her mail for now." Zeke tucked the telegram into his coat pocket. They finished their shopping and loaded the sled for the trip to the infirmary. Clara was sitting up in a chair by the window when they arrived, looking stronger than she had in weeks. The girls rushed to show her their new boots and the cloth they'd chosen. "My, what fine things," she smiled, running her fingers over the wool. "You'll look so grown up in new dresses." Zeke hung back, then remembered the telegram. "This came for you at the store," he said, holding it out. Clara's face changed slightly as she took the envelope. She read it silently, her expression carefully neutral, then folded it away in her apron pocket. "Just word from an old friend," she said lightly when the girls asked. But Zeke noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the fabric in her lap. That evening, after supper was cleared away, the twins begged for a story before bed. They had pushed their small cots close to the hearth, wrapped in quilts against the night chill. "Tell us about when you were little," Lydia pleaded. "Did you live in a cabin like this?" Zeke settled into his chair, thinking back. "Reckon I did, though it wasn't half as nice as this one. My pa built it himself when he first came out west." "Was he a mountain man like you?" Lottie asked. "No, he was a farmer mostly. Worked other folks' land till he could get his own." Zeke paused, memories surfacing. "I remember one winter, harder than most. Snow so deep you couldn't see the fence posts. A family's wagon broke down near our place, and mother, father, 3 little ones no bigger than you." The girls leaned forward, firelight dancing on their faces. "Pa took them all in, though we barely had enough for ourselves. Shared our food, helped fix their wagon. Mama gave them her extra quilts." Zeke's voice grew soft. "When I asked why we were helping strangers, Pa said sometimes the good Lord puts folks in our path so we can be his hands here on earth." He looked down at the twins, suddenly realizing he was teaching the same lesson his father had shown him all those years ago. The girls' eyes were heavy with sleep, but they smiled contentedly. "Your pa was right smart," Lydia murmured, snuggling deeper into her quilts. "That he was," Zeke agreed quietly. "That he was." The fire crackled low as the girls drifted off to sleep. Zeke sat watching them for a long while, remembering his father's weathered hands helping strangers, showing him what it meant to be a man. Now here he was, passing on those same lessons to two little girls who had appeared on his path like winter angels. Christmas Eve morning dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the Colorado highlands. Zeke stood in the doorway of his cabin, watching the twins bounce through knee-deep drifts toward a stand of young pines. "This one," Lydia called, pointing to a tree about their height. "No, that one," Lottie countered, gesturing to another nearby. Zeke followed with his axe, his breath clouding in the crisp air. "Remember what I told you about picking a tree?" "Straight trunk," Lydia recited. "Full branches," Lottie added. "And not too big for the cabin," they finished together. They finally settled on a perfect little pine, its branches dusted with snow. Zeke showed them how to cut it properly, letting them help guide the axe. The fresh scent of pine filled the air as the tree fell with a soft thump into the snow. Back inside, they set the tree in a corner by the hearth, using rocks to steady its base. The twins had spent evenings making paper chains, carefully gluing strips into rings. Now they draped their creations around the branches, red berries they'd dried in autumn adding spots of color. "Mama always said Christmas trees need something shiny," Lottie said, frowning at their simple decorations. Zeke disappeared into his room, returning with something that made the girls gasp, a small tin star, carefully polished. "My ma's," he explained gruffly. "Been saving it." He lifted Lydia up so she could place it on top of the tree. The morning passed quickly as they prepared for the evening church service, the cabin filled with the smell of baking as the girls mixed and rolled out biscuits, working with careful concentration. "Mama will be proud of these," Lydia declared, flour streaking her cheek. "Sure will," Zeke agreed, watching them work. These past weeks, their presence had transformed his quiet cabin into something he'd never expected to have again, a home. As dusk approached, they bundled up warmly and loaded the still warm biscuits into a basket covered with a clean cloth. The church windows glowed with lamplight as they approached, casting warm squares of light onto the snow. Clara stood waiting at the entrance, leaning on a wooden cane but looking stronger than she had in weeks. Her eyes brightened at the sight of them. "My beautiful girls," she said softly as the twins rushed to hug her. "And Mr. Boone, you've brought them all this way through the snow." "Weren't nothing," Zeke replied, touching his hat brim. "They insisted on bringing biscuits they made themselves." Inside, lanterns hung from hooks along the walls, their flames reflecting off the windows. The wooden pews gleamed with years of polish, and pine boughs decorated the altar. The familiar scent of beeswax candles filled the air. As they entered, Zeke noticed something different. Instead of the usual sideways glances and whispers, their neighbors smiled and called out greetings. Mrs. Peterson from the general store complimented the girls' neat braids. The blacksmith's wife asked after Clara's health with genuine concern. The pastor approached them, his kind face wreathed in smiles. "Please," he said, gesturing to the front pew. "Join us here." Zeke understood the significance of this invitation. The front pew, traditionally reserved for the most respected families. He felt Clara stiffen slightly beside him, then straighten her shoulders. They settled into the smooth wood of the pew, the twins between Zeke and Clara. As the service began, hymns filled the small church, voices rising to the rafters in celebration. The girls sang every word, their clear voices joining the congregations. Zeke found himself remembering other Christmas Eves, as a boy, standing beside his parents, as a young husband, his wife's hand in his. Now here he sat with these three who had appeared so unexpectedly in his life. The thought both warmed and unsettled him. After the service, families gathered to share Christmas treats. The twins proudly offered their biscuits, beaming as people praised their baking. Clara watched them with quiet pride, her face glowing in the lamplight. "You've done well by them," the pastor said quietly to Zeke. "Anyone can see they're thriving in your care." Zeke nodded, unable to find words for how these weeks had changed him. Watching the girls move confidently through the crowd, he could imagine a future he hadn't dared consider before, one where this temporary arrangement became permanent. The church slowly emptied as families headed home for their Christmas Eve celebrations. Outside, snow had begun falling again, large flakes drifting lazily in the still air. They walked slowly through the quiet streets, the twins skipping ahead to catch snowflakes on their tongues. Clara had taken a room above the seamstress's shop while she recovered, and they accompanied her to the door. The girls hugged her tightly, reluctant to let go. Now, she soothed. You'll see me tomorrow. Mr. Boone has promised, hasn't he? First thing, Zeke confirmed, right after morning chores. The twins finally released their mother and took his hands as they headed home. Their small fingers were warm in his, trusting and sure. The town lay quiet around them, smoke rising from chimneys, windows glowing with candlelight. Later, alone in his cabin, Zeke added wood to the banked fire. The tree stood in its corner, paper chains casting shadows on the wall. Joy filled him when he thought of the evening, the acceptance they'd been shown, the way the girls had glowed with happiness, Clara's quiet dignity. Yet beneath that joy lay something else, a fear he couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was the very completeness of his happiness, or the memory of how quickly such happiness could be lost. He stood at the window for a long time, watching snow fall in the darkness, trying to still the uneasy beating of his heart. The morning after Christmas dawned gray and bitter cold. Frost patterns decorated the cabin windows as Zeke helped the twins bundle up in their warmest coats. They were heading into town early to help Clara move back to her homestead cabin, and excitement filled the girls' chatter. We'll make Mama's bed real nice, Lydia said, wrapping her scarf tight. And sweep everything clean, Lottie added, pulling on her mittens. The trip into town took longer than usual, their mule picking carefully through fresh snow. As they approached the seamstress's shop where Clara had been staying, Zeke noticed a well-dressed stranger standing near the door. The man's polished bowler hat and city boots seemed out of place against the snow-covered boardwalk. Clara emerged from the shop just then, carrying a small bundle of her belongings. Before Zeke could dismount to help her, the stranger stepped forward, removing his hat with practiced smoothness. Mrs. Dawes? His voice carried clearly in the cold air. James Harlan, representing the Western Railroad Company. He produced a leather folder from his coat. I have some matters to discuss with you regarding your property. Zeke felt the twins grow still beside him. Clara's face remained composed, but her fingers tightened on her cane. What matters would those be, Mr. Harlan? She asked quietly. Harlan withdrew several official-looking papers from his folder. I regret to inform you that your current deed claim must be vacated. The railroad requires that location for a new depot installation. His tone was polite but held no warmth. The paperwork your late husband filed is, unfortunately, void under federal statute. That's not possible, Clara said. Samuel filed everything properly. We have the signed documents. Ah, but you see, Harlan smiled thinly. Mixed heritage claims filed under that particular clause have been recently reviewed. The federal office has determined them invalid without additional certification. He paused. Certification which I believe would be quite difficult to obtain now. Zeke felt anger rise in his chest at the man's smug tone. The twins pressed closer to him, their small bodies tense with worry. Now see here, Zeke started, but Harlan smoothly interrupted. I should mention, he continued, glancing meaningfully at the girls, that the county takes a dim view of temporary guardians who cannot provide stable housing for their wards. His smile never wavered. I would hate to see that affect any pending custody arrangements. Clara swayed slightly, and Zeke moved quickly to support her arm. The twins clung to his coat, their faces pale. Perhaps we should continue this discussion inside, Harlan suggested, gesturing to the seamstress's shop door. The weather appears to be turning. Indeed, fresh snowflakes had begun drifting down, promising another heavy storm. But Zeke had no intention of letting this man corner Clara further. Mrs. Dawes needs rest, he said firmly. Any more discussion can wait. He helped Clara back inside, the twins following close behind. The seamstress, Mrs. Peterson, took one look at Clara's face and quickly offered her back the room upstairs. Storm's coming anyway, she said kindly. Best to stay put for now. Through the shop window they watched Harlan stride away, his bowler hat dark against the falling snow. His papers remained tucked in his folder, unserved but hanging over them like a shadow. The day that had started with such hope now felt heavy with worry. Mrs. Peterson brought up soup for their supper, but even the twins ate quietly, their usual chatter subdued. Clara barely touched her bowl, her eyes distant. "Maybe the judge will help," Lydia ventured finally. "He's been nice to us." "Judge Halbrook is fair," Zeke agreed, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "He'll look at all sides." But he remembered the railroad's influence in other towns he'd passed through, how money seemed to speak louder than justice. The thought of the twins being taken away because he couldn't provide a proper home made his chest tight with fear. Snow fell steadily outside the windows now, thick white curtains that would make travel impossible until it cleared. The seamstress brought extra blankets and insisted they all stay the night. She made up pallets for the twins near the stove while Clara returned to her rented room upstairs. "We're not leaving Mama again, are we?" Lottie whispered as Zeke tucked them in. "Not if I can help it," he promised, smoothing her hair. Long after the girls fell asleep, Zeke sat in a chair by the window, watching snow pile up in the street. Harlan's words kept repeating in his mind, along with the memory of his satisfied expression. The man had played his hand well, threatening both Clara's home and Zeke's guardianship in one smooth move. The railroad had deep pockets and clever lawyers. Judge Halbrook might be fair, but would that be enough against such opposition? Zeke had seen too many small homesteaders pushed aside by progress to feel easy about their chances. He thought of Clara's quiet dignity in the face of Harlan's veiled threats, of the twins' worried faces. These three had worked their way into his heart over the past weeks, becoming more precious to him than he'd thought possible. The idea of losing them now, of seeing them separated and displaced, was almost more than he could bear. Sleep eluded him as the night wore on. The wind picked up, driving snow against the windows in soft patterns. Somewhere in the darkness, a train whistle sounded, long and lonely, like a reminder of the changes bearing down on their small world. 2 days passed before the heavy snowfall finally ceased. The morning sun sparkled across pristine drifts that reached past Zeke's knees as he made his way toward Clara's borrowed room above the seamstress's shop. His breath formed clouds in the crisp air while he worked, shovel biting into the packed snow to clear a path to the door. The twins watched from the upstairs window, their faces pressed against the glass. Their excitement was visible even from the street below as they spotted him working. Soon they burst out the door, bundled in their new winter coats. "Can we help?" Lydia called, already reaching for the spare shovel propped against the wall. "Reckon you can," Zeke said, watching as the girls took turns clearing smaller sections. Their cheeks grew rosy with effort and pride. Clara appeared in the doorway, leaning on her cane. "You'll wear yourselves out before we even start the journey," she said, but her eyes held warmth as she watched her daughter's work. Zeke paused, wiping his brow despite the cold. "The path to church will be near impossible with these drifts. I thought maybe—" He hesitated, then pressed on. "Maybe you and the girls might stay at my cabin for a spell, just until things clear some." Clara considered this, her expression thoughtful. "That's kind of you to offer." "It's closer to town than your homestead," Zeke added, "and warmer than this room, begging Mrs. Peterson's pardon." The twins immediately began pleading their case. "Please, Mama, we can show you everything we've learned." "Like splitting kindling," Lottie said proudly. "And making biscuits almost as good as yours," Lydia added. Clara's resistance softened at their enthusiasm. "Well, perhaps for a few days." It took the better part of an hour to load Clara's few belongings onto the sled. Zeke had brought extra blankets, tucking them around Clara and the girls once they were settled. The mule picked its way carefully through the deep snow, the sled runners cutting clean tracks behind them. At the cabin, the twins burst into action, eager to show their mother all the changes they'd made. They pointed out the pine bough decorations still hanging from Christmas, the neat stack of split wood by the hearth, the row of dried herbs they'd helped gather hanging from the rafters. Clara took it all in, her eyes growing damp as she noticed details that spoke of care and attention. The girls' warm winter boots by the door, their carefully mended stockings, the way they remembered to wash their hands before helping prepare the evening meal. These were not neglected children, but ones who had been given structure and gentle guidance. "They're good girls," Zeke said quietly, noticing her expression. "Quick to learn and eager to help." Clara nodded, unable to speak for a moment. That evening, after a simple supper of bean soup and cornbread, the twins climbed up to their sleeping loft, their whispered conversations growing slower until they faded into soft breathing. Clara sat near the fire, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea while Zeke added another log to the flames. "There's something I should tell you," Clara said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the land claim." Zeke settled into the chair opposite her, waiting. "Samuel, my husband, he was careful with papers, traditional in some ways, but he understood the white man's law." She stared into the fire. "He filed everything properly for the mixed heritage homestead clause. Had witnesses sign paid fees in full?" "The railroad man claimed those papers weren't valid," Zeke reminded her gently. "Yes, but Samuel—" She took a deep breath. "He kept proof. Documents showing the land was rightfully his through his mother's people and his father's service in the cavalry. He said those papers would protect us if anyone ever challenged our claim." Zeke leaned forward. "Where are these papers now?" "That's just it. I'm not certain they survived. After Samuel died, I was in such grief I barely remembered to eat, let alone check his strongbox." Her hands trembled slightly. "It might still be there, in the cabin. Or it might have been lost when we had to leave so quickly." Hope flickered in Zeke's chest. "Soon as the snow permits, we'll search that cabin top to bottom." Morning brought fresh challenges. They set out early to check the road toward Clara's homestead, only to find several large pines had fallen across the path, their branches heavy with snow. "Can't get the sled through that," Zeke muttered, studying the obstacle. Clara set her jaw determinedly. "Then we'll clear it." Together they tackled the fallen trees. Zeke swung the axe while Clara helped drag smaller branches aside. The twins made themselves useful too, running back to the cabin to bring them hot tea in tin cups. "Go, Papa!" Lydia cheered as Zeke's axe bit deep into a trunk. "Mama's stronger than she looks," Lottie added proudly, watching Clara handle a large branch. The work was slow but steady. Clara moved with increasing confidence, her recent illness seeming to fade in the crisp air and purposeful activity. When she stumbled once on a hidden root, Zeke caught her elbow, steadying her without comment. Their eyes met briefly, understanding passing between them. They were in this together now, whatever came. The twins kept their spirits up, bringing fresh tea when the first cups grew cold and making up silly songs about cutting trees. Their laughter echoed through the snow-hushed forest, bright as the winter sunshine sparkling on the drifts. By mid-morning, they had cleared enough space for the sled to pass through once they were ready to make the journey to Clara's cabin. The papers, if they still existed, would have to wait for another day. But now they had hope. Slim as it might be, that proof of their rightful claim might still exist. The January morning dawned clear and cold as Zeke hitched the mule to the sled. Frost sparkled on the animal's whiskers, while Clara helped the twins bundle up in layers of wool and quilts. The girls' excitement filled the crisp air despite the early hour. "Will we see our old room?" Lottie asked, settling into the nest of blankets. "And Mama's garden?" Lydia added, though the plot would be deep under snow. Clara nodded, tucking the blankets tighter around them. "Yes, though it won't be as warm as we left it." Zeke offered Clara his hand as she climbed onto the sled beside her daughters. The sun was just breaking over the mountain peaks as they set out, casting long shadows across the snow-covered trail. The mule's steady breathing and the soft crunch of runners against snow filled the quiet morning. When they finally reached the cabin, it stood like a snow-covered ghost of itself. Drifts had piled nearly to the windowsills, and icicles hung like crystal daggers from the eaves. Zeke waded through the deep snow to force open the door, which groaned on its hinges. Inside, their breath clouded in the dim light. While Clara and the girls gathered kindling for the cold hearth, Zeke wasted no time beginning the search. He ran his hands along the wall boards, testing for loose planks. Finding none, he moved to the floor, prying up boards one by one with the claw of his hammer. Clara searched too, moving with purpose through the familiar space. She checked behind the rough shelf boards, inside the empty flour barrel, and finally dropped to her knees beside the bed. Reaching underneath, her fingers found something solid, a tin box, dusty but intact. "Here," she called softly, pulling it into the weak sunlight now filtering through the frosted windows. The twins crowded close as Clara opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside lay bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, a dried flower pressed between pages of scripture, and finally, the papers they desperately needed. Clara unfolded the deed with care, revealing the county seal stamped clearly at the bottom. "It's here," she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "Samuel's proof, the mixed heritage clause, the witnesses' signatures, everything." Zeke studied the document over her shoulder, relief evident in his voice. "This is what we need. This'll stop Harlan's claim cold." By then the fire had caught properly, its warmth slowly filling the cabin. As evening approached, they decided to stay the night rather than risk the darkening trail. They spread blankets near the hearth, and Clara began sharing stories about Samuel as they ate a simple supper of dried beef and hard biscuits. "Your papa had the gentlest way with horses," she told the twins, her voice soft with memory. "He could calm the wildest colt just by speaking low and easy. And he loved this land something fierce, said it sang to his spirit same as his mother's people taught him." The girls listened intently, their eyes heavy with sleep, until they drifted off to their mother's voice and the crackling of the fire. Precious papers secured safely in the tin box, they rested through the night, ready for the journey back to town at dawn. The courthouse stood quiet in the pale morning light as Zeke and Clara climbed the worn wooden steps, the precious tin box clutched tightly in her hands. Inside Judge Halbrook's office, the air smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. The judge adjusted his spectacles as he carefully examined each page of the deed, holding the papers up to the window light to study the watermarks. "This is genuine," he said finally, setting the document on his polished desk. "The mixed heritage clause is properly recorded, and Samuel Dawes's claim was filed according to territorial law." He stroked his gray beard thoughtfully. "However, Harlan will bring federal railroad attorneys to contest it. They rarely lose these battles." Clara's fingers twisted in her shawl. "But the land is rightfully ours." "Indeed it is, Mrs. Dawes. We'll hold a formal hearing in 2 weeks' time." The judge's kind eyes turned to Zeke. "Meanwhile, Mr. Boone, continue demonstrating your fitness as guardian. The matters are connected now. A stable home life for the children strengthens everyone's position." Zeke nodded solemnly. "Much obliged for your fairness, Judge." Outside, snow had begun falling again, dusting Clara's dark hair as they walked to the schoolhouse to enroll the twins. The teacher, Miss Bennett, welcomed Lydia and Lottie warmly, showing them to shared desk near the pot-bellied stove. Each morning after that, the girls trudged through the snow carrying their lunch pails, faces bright with excitement for learning. Their matching wool scarves, knitted by Clara during her recovery, fluttered behind them like colorful flags. Other children gradually welcomed them, sharing marbles at recess and walking home together. Zeke made a point to visit Clara's rented room daily, hauling wood for her small stove and bringing provisions, coffee, flour, salt pork. Often he stayed for supper, the twins chattering about their lessons while Clara served up bowls of steaming stew. Sometimes they sat together afterward, comfortable in shared silence while the girls did their figures on slate boards. Their quiet partnership grew naturally, like spring grass after snowmelt. No grand declarations were needed, just the steady rhythm of days spent ensuring the twins were warm, fed, and learning. Clara's gentle strength complemented Zeke's quiet dependability, each making the other's load lighter. One evening, as Zeke stoked the fire, the girls presented him with a surprise, a drawing done in chalk and charcoal on brown paper. 4 figures stood holding hands, him, Clara, and the twins, stick-armed but smiling beneath a bright yellow sun. Without a word, Zeke carefully tacked it above the mantel, where firelight made the simple family portrait glow. "That's all of us together," Lydia explained proudly. "Just the way it should be," Lottie added with a decisive nod. Zeke's throat felt tight as he looked at the drawing, then at the hopeful faces around him. The coming legal battle loomed like storm clouds on the horizon, but here, in this moment, he knew with bone-deep certainty that he would fight with everything he had to keep this family together. James Harlan moved through town like a shadow in his pressed black suit, stopping to chat with shopkeepers and ranchers. His polished words painted pictures of progress, a bustling depot bringing trade, hotels full of travelers, streets lined with new businesses. But beneath the promises lay darker whispers about Clara's claim and Zeke's fitness to raise children. A mountain man with no proper house? 2 girls need a mother's guidance, Harlan would say, adjusting his bowler hat. And that mixed heritage deed, mighty suspicious timing, wouldn't you say? The poison spread slowly. At the general store, the owner's usual friendly greeting turned cool when Zeke came for supplies. Several townsfolk crossed the street to avoid speaking to him, but others stood firm. The baker still slipped extra rolls into his sack, and the blacksmith loudly declared he'd rather deal with honest folk than railroad money. The night air was bitter cold when the stone came crashing through the cabin window. Glass scattered across the floor as the twins screamed, huddling together in their nightgowns. Zeke grabbed his rifle and rushed outside, but found only footprints leading into darkness. Back inside, he found the girls trembling by the hearth. "Nobody's gonna hurt you," he promised, gathering them close. "Not while I'm here." But anger burned in his chest as he nailed a board over the broken pane. The next morning, Clara insisted on riding to town with him despite the freezing wind. "We face this together," she said firmly, wrapping her shawl tighter. Her eyes held the same quiet strength he'd first seen when she was sick. The church social buzzed with conversation when they arrived. Harlan stood near the coffee urn, speaking softly to a cluster of attentive listeners. Clara squared her shoulders and walked straight to the center of the room. "I'd like to speak if I may," she said clearly. The room hushed. "Some of you knew my husband Samuel. He filed our land claim properly under a treaty clause meant to honor both his Comanche heritage and his service to this territory." Zeke stepped forward to stand beside her. "We aim to keep that land as a home for these girls, a place where they can grow up proud of who they are, not ashamed." His voice carried to every corner. "That's worth more than any railroad money." The pastor moved through the crowd to join them. "The Lord calls us to judge fairly and protect the widow and orphan," he declared. "I'll testify to that at the hearing myself." Heads nodded throughout the room. The baker's wife brought Clara a cup of tea, patting her hand. The blacksmith clapped Zeke's shoulder. One by one, neighbors came forward to offer support, while Harlan slipped away, leaving his bowler hat on the coat rack. Standing together, Zeke and Clara watched the twins playing tag with other children around the pews. For the first time since the window broke, they were laughing again. Whatever the hearing might bring, they weren't facing it alone. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the wooden floor of Judge Holbrook's office. Every bench and chair sat filled with townsfolk, the pastor's black coat beside the schoolmarm's neat dress, the deacon's weathered face next to fresh scrubbed farmers, the twins perched on a front bench, their Sunday dresses pressed smooth, while Clara gripped her cane beside them. James Harlan spread his maps across the judge's desk with flourish. "Federal statutes clearly state," he began, but his polished words seemed to bounce off the judge's steady gaze. When Zeke's turn came, he laid out the deed and marriage papers with careful hands. "Your Honor," he said simply, "this land ain't just about property. It's about a family's right to stay whole." The pastor spoke of Clara's character and faith. The schoolmarm praised the twins' progress. Outside, winter wind rattled the windows while Judge Holbrook studied each document. "The treaty clause is binding," he declared finally. "The land remains with Mrs. Dawes. Furthermore, Mr. Boone has proven himself a fit guardian. The girls will stay in his care permanently." Joy exploded through the room. Lydia and Lottie launched themselves at Zeke, nearly knocking him backward. Tears streamed down Clara's cheeks as neighbors surrounded them with congratulations. Even those who doubted now offered handshakes and backslaps while Harlan gathered his maps and slipped away. The February sun brought longer days and softer winds to the Colorado highlands. Inside Zeke's cabin, hand-sewn curtains from Clara fluttered at the windows, casting dancing shadows across the new pine table he'd traded winter pelts to obtain. A young evergreen transplanted from their Christmas celebration stood proud near the front door, a living reminder of their first holiday together. The evening lamp cast a warm glow as Clara sat in her rocking chair, nimble fingers working through a basket of socks that needed mending. By the crackling fire, Zeke held his Bible open, the twins nestled against him like 2 warm puppies. His deep voice filled the room with ancient words of comfort and wisdom. The steady drip of melting snow from the eaves marked winter's retreat. Lydia looked up at him with bright eyes, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. "You're coming with us," she quoted from their first meeting. "We need a daddy like you." Zeke's laugh rumbled in his chest as he drew both girls closer. "Guess I needed daughters like you too," he admitted softly. Across the room, Clara's eyes met his, her smile gentle but full of meaning. As another log settled in the fire with a shower of sparks, Zeke realized the cabin hadn't felt this much like home since long before he'd lost his first family. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.